YouTube. We are live for the first time on the very first Icecast. And, well, it's almost the very first. We did do a little pilot episode with Charlie Adlard the other week, which went really well. But I forgot to press the go switch. So we did the first sort of 10 minutes without knowing that nobody's watching us. But this time, well, nobody's watching us yet, but they can. We've got one viewer. Hello to our one viewer. Say hello in the comments. So this is the Icecast, and with me tonight are my co-hosts. On my right is Mr. Andrew Richmond. Say hello, Andrew.
Hello, Andrew.
Hey, that's original. And
hey.
beneath me is Mr. Olly McNamee. Say hello, Olly.
Hello, Shane.
Hey, how you doing, guys? You all right?
Very good.
Excellent. Thank you so much for assisting me. Well, you'll be doing all the work, actually. You'll be doing all the work. I'm just going to sit here and watch. And tonight on the Icecast, on our very first one, we have two very special guests. First up, I'd like to introduce the artist of the book that we're going to be promoting tonight, and that is Mr. Hunt Emerson. Welcome to the Icecast, Hunt. Hello.
Hello, Shane. Hello, everybody.
Hey. Hello, Hunt.
Hi, Ollie. Hi, Andrew.
Great to have you. Great to have you here, Hunt. Nice to see you again.
It's interesting to be here.
Well, we've already had some shenanigans off broadcast, haven't we? With Sam's, I think it's Sam's wife coming home and dragging him off while he was trying to sort out the tech. So that was fun.
Yeah, who's Sam? Who's Sam?
Yeah, Sam. Sam's not real. He doesn't exist. He's in the background. And the second guest we'd like to welcome on tonight, if Sam can do the job and get him on the screen, is Mr. Kevin Jackson. Hello, Kevin.
Yay.
Hey, Shane. Hey.
Hello, Kevin.
Hi, Hunt.
Hello.
Now, Kev, you've not met my other two co-hosts, have you, Mr. Andrew Richmond?
I fear not.
No, and Olly McNamee. These are the guys that do all the hard work and all the research and probably ask better questions than me. So they'll be yeah. Well, I bloody hope so. Anyway, so I'd like to say thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you, Kevin and to Hunt, for being guests tonight. It's really great to have you here with us. We hope that it's not been too complicated getting online.
Not for me. Yep. Ooh.
For me. And we're here primarily tonight to, before we get into anything else, to talk about your new book that you guys have got coming out, which is entitled, what's it entitled?
Lives of the Great Occultists.
Yes. And it's a sort of a culmination of various bits and bobs, isn't it? Could you talk us through it, Kevin, about what the concept of the book is?
I think Hunt probably could do this better than I can, but I'll just start. It's the thing about it is that it's very strongly factual. You can read it and learn a lot of things. We haven't actually told any lies about it, but the images by Hunt are wild and madcap and very, very funny, I think. So on the one hand, you could read it just to fall around laughing, which I hope you will. And you can also read it as a kind of primer to several centuries of the occult, done in about, I think there are about 43 different occultists, ranging from John Dee, way back in the 16th and 17th centuries, right up to David Bowie.
Wow. That's a big cross-section, isn't it? So how did you go about sort of choosing which characters you would feature? What was there a criteria? Was it just because these are the guys that you're personally interested in as creators? Was there a process for that?
Shall I do this?
It's you again, Kevin.
Yeah. It really, the whole thing, if I recall correctly, began more or less by accident. In that Hunt had been doing for many years a comic for Fortean Times called Phenomenomics, and there was a period when he was, not surprisingly, strapped for an idea, and I just told him an anecdote that I'd read many years ago when I was basically just a kid, about a strange thing that a man called William Seabrook saw the famous occultist Aleister Crowley do in New York. He fell into step behind an unknown pedestrian, mimicked him, and then fell over, and the pedestrian fell over. Right? Great story. And I told this to him, and said, "Oh, do that." And then as I recall, we just started talking and said, well, there's mileage in this. Let's do a bit more Crowley, and we could then do some others. So we do ours.
Yeah, and it's like an organic growth then from that original concept.
That's a dignified way of putting it. Yeah.
Well,
Well, you must remember that it was never conceived as a book in the first place.
No.
It was me meeting a monthly deadline to put in a page for 40 Times.
Yeah.
And we did the Aleister Crowley page. And where have we gone?
Oh, we're still
there.
There
It is. Yes, I thought we had it. I
Yeah.
thought we had it. That's the walking trick, Crowley walking trick. And it worked. And then I think I did something else, some other story for the next month and the next month. And then we did another one. And then we did another one. And we just started to get the idea that these were actually going to work well. So that was kind of when we, or I should say Kevin, started kind of consciously looking for occultists to do. We did eventually do Aleister Crowley's life, but that wasn't until quite a long time further on. And it's only in the last year, I suppose, that we realised that this actually was best dealt with as a book collected together, because it went on for years over the whole 9 years or something like that. 7
I think
years.
it was even a little bit more, Hunt. I think it was more like 12, wasn't it?
Wow. Time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it?
Well, I was looking through piles of the artwork the other day, and the only way I can tell what year they were done in was the kind of paper they're drawn on. And so I noticed that this Aleister Crowley page was on a much older sort of paper than the more recent ones. Just sold this one, by the way, the other day.
Oh, well done.
Yeah.
Should we plug the fact that original artwork is available via your website?
Artwork is available, yes, on the website.
And a bargain it is too.
I was just going to say, actually, it's nice that it's all traditionally created. So the original artwork, I imagine, then is in black and white, is it? And then you added digitally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
that's nice. Nice to be able to get the original sort of black and white stuff. Really nice. Yeah. Can we enlarge on that, Sam? Sam, the imaginary man. Can we make that a little bit bigger so people can see it? I can see off screen that Sam's actually being attacked by a child at the moment. Well, he's trying to,
we sent it.
It's a very effective attack. I think you had a question, didn't you, Ollie, about another one of Hunt's books?
Well, before we go on to one of his longer standing strips that have come, I'm interested in a question when you mentioned Dr. John Dee very early on. Do you feel that a lot of these early occultists, particularly someone like Dr. John Dee, are kind of forgotten about when it comes to the history books? I mean, I looked into him several years ago as a very interesting character because I was teaching the Tempest at the time. And he contributed so much to Elizabethan history, and yet he's never really mentioned. And do you feel this is a wider issue with such occultists like Dr. John Dee?
That's an interesting question. I mean, it's sometimes hard if you've got a bee in your bonnet about something to realise that nobody else particularly does. I mean, I've been interested in Dee since I was a kid, really. And plug my own material. I've actually made a film about him. It's only a short 12-minute film called A Mask for Dr. Dee. But it ends with a kind of dream sequence in which you see the first production of The Tempest, which happened, I think it was 2 years after Dee's death. And the actor who plays John Dee in the main body of the film plays Prospero in the final scene. Dee, he fascinates me. I come at Dee partly by way of a writer you may know called Dame Frances Yates, very fashionable in the 60s and 70s. And she wrote a lot about Elizabethan occultism. And I owe a lot of my interest and certainly such knowledge as I have to Dame Frances. So here's to you in the afterlife, Dame.
But what other characters from history that you knew, both of you, that you really wanted to include? Obviously, you've got a finite amount of pages, and there must be a top 10. And I don't want to go through the top 10. It's not one of those sort of podcasts. But who are the ones you both knew you definitely needed to include in this collection?
I didn't know I needed to include any of them. It was all him.
Hunt is politely pointing out that I'm the nutter. He's the sane one, and I'm the occultist bore. Avoid me in the pub.
He written my Druim. No, really, the knowledge comes from Kevin about all of this. Really, honestly.
But all the humour and the poetry comes from Hunt.
But I suppose the question goes to you then, Kevin. There must have been a certain list that you had to whittle down, but there must have been certain ones at the top of that list that you wanted to include straight away. How easy a process was it to whittle it down to a certain amount?
Well, I'd like to say, of course, that I, like all artists, I suffer terribly. Actually, it was a piece of piss, really. It was, I mean, the famous names like D sort of declare themselves.
Yes.
And the less famous ones, I mean, essentially what I did was, I'd think of okay, who do we do next? And then I'd look into my bookshelves, and find out if there was anything in their lives that seemed, number one, capable of a visual treatment, and number two, had enough nuttiness in it to make it Hunt, to make it funny. So very often I supplied Hunt with something which was a bit informative but drab, and Hunt sort of magicked it, sprinkled his fairy dust, and it turned into what I honestly, I'm allowed to say this because he's the wit, it really is one of the funniest books I've ever read, let alone been a part of.
I've seen plenty of the pages that Hunt's been dripping on social media and Facebook, and they look absolutely wonderful. And really, it's a skill.
He's got a visit.
It's a skill to really sort of encapsulate the whole history of a person in an image, in a few images. Hunt, how? I mean, after years of practice, do you still find it a challenge to approach each character, each subject this way?
I'll tell you this, Ollie, that's the fun part these days. In any comics I'm doing, the fun part is writing them or organising them like this, editing them and putting them together. Getting the stuff from Kevin, I mean, we worked together on Dante's Inferno in the same kind of way, where he was feeding me information and I was able to arrange it so that it looked right on the page and worked as a comic, And I love doing that. I love the puzzle of it. And I hear it all in my head, hear the dialogue going on, and I know how to edit dialogue so that you get the information across without it coming over as being didactic. It sounds more like a conversation, Once all of that's done, then actually drawing the stuff is just hard work. Because I know what it's going to look like by then, you see, more or less.
Right.
But as I say, getting the material from Kevin and looking to it. He says, "Oh, it's dry material," and I put the humour in, but that's not the case. He's got a good eye for knowing what is going to work as a bizarre story, and seeing this and seeing how it's going to unfold on the page. That was the best bit of it.
Well, you're also
sorry.
No, the best bit was getting the check. But
I've said to a number of people over the years that collaborating with Hunt, especially on this one, has been a bit like having Christmas once a month, because I send off my letter to Santa up there in Handsworth, and it will say that I remember, for example, one particular image where it was in about a very interesting guy called Jack Parsons, who was both a rocket scientist, yes, it was rocket science, but also was a Crowleyan. He followed Crowley's brand of black magic. And at one point, he decided to create a magical entity called a moonchild. So I just sent this information to Hunt, and Hunt came back with this image, absolutely dazzling, I think, of a kind of really goofy-looking half moon. In nappies and with a dummy in its mouth and great big eyes, and I just fell around laughing the moment I saw that. I just thought, what? And again, only Hunt. Somebody else could come up with with something more drippy, suppose. But to Hunt, it's just a kind of lateral thinking and complete ingenuity that always makes me laugh.
Yes, I can imagine.
Is there new material in the book, or is it basically a compilation of the 40 Times?
No, it's all work that appeared in 40 Times. The last one we did was David Bowie when he died. And since then, I've been doing the page, writing and drawing the pages myself for 14 times. I'm sure that at some point we'll go back to doing some more stuff, not necessarily occultists. We're not actually working on anything together at the moment, but I'm sure that that's just a matter of time, you know.
Yeah, inevitable. Inevitability.
The fact also is that, I mean, I think that we decide, having looked through, as I say, there are about 43, I think, case histories or biographies. Yeah. I mean, I looked through, I checked out the possibility of about 150 or maybe more than that. And a lot of the other ones, you know, they're interesting in a historical sense, but they didn't really have that madcap quality that would make a good comic. And I ruled them out because I just thought, you know, it's like making a funny cartoon about somebody fantastically boring, you know, William Rees-Mogg, you know. It just the material is resistant to humor. Whoa.
It's all right, don't worry, somebody will pick it up.
So I think, you know, there were 2 or 3 other occultists that we might have put in, but to be frank, I think we've reached our, you know, quit when you're ahead.
Yeah, it had gone on for long enough, really. And as I said, Bowie was the last one, and that was almost an afterthought. We may not have done him, well, we wouldn't have done him had he not died, because I think at some point we made a rule that they were all going to be dead. Go
right.
away.
I'm just going to mute you while that's going on.
Yeah.
That's really, really loud. We'd have to have a rule for these things. Switch your phones off. You live in the
like a fax was coming through.
Sorry?
Sounds like a fax was coming through.
I wouldn't be surprised if Hunt had a fax machine. I'll let him back on. You're back now. Yeah, you're back. Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked about the current work that you've got out, which is really exciting. We can't, you know, really looking forward to having a look at that. But also, you guys have got huge careers behind you, both of you. And I mean, we're not going to be able to cover it all tonight because there's so much there.
Yes, we will.
Oh, no, you won't.
Well, there you go, Ollie. That's a challenge for you. But I'm really interested in how both of you got into doing comics. I mean, I know, Hunt, that you're primarily a cartoonist, comic artist, but Kevin, you do lots of other stuff as well. You know, you've done work in TV, you've produced films, and you've written a lot of really cool prose. So, what was how did comics come about for you?
Hunt seduced me. I blame it all on that terrible
Seduction of
man.
the innocents.
Seduction of the innocents, indeed. You know, comics were always a very important part of my life, and one of the things of which Hunt and I bonded with pleasure and surprise was that we were both huge fans of the 1950s, in the very early incarnation of Mad magazine in America, with great geniuses like Harvey Kurtzman and others. And particularly, there was one comic that it's a technique that I recognize Hunt did later in his own Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, which is, I think it was, who was the artist? Was it Bill Elder?
Yeah.
The Raven. What Mad magazine did is they ran a completely straight version of The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, famously gloomy and supernatural poem. But the illustrations that went with it were one, were fantastically detailed, and 2, they were incredibly funny. And I was completely besotted by this. And you know, I put it to one side with childish things. And then many years later, the first time I met Hunt was when he was launching the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, which must have been back in the mid-80s or thereabouts.
Yeah.
And it was exactly the same thing. It was the poem, Coleridge's famous poem, is printed absolutely faithfully, but then the illustrations are, you know, Hunt going off into mad little Hunt universes, and just delightful. A real masterpiece, I think. And you know, later the chance to work with Hunt came up, and I just, you know, Horby. Nothing would have stopped me from trying to work with Hunt.
I was the same about Mad magazine, Mad Comic, when it was a comic. And in fact, the one that really inspired me was Wally Wood doing The Wreck of the Hesperus, the Longfellow poem, The Wreck of the Hesperus. And I have a particular interest in old sailing ships and that kind of thing, and the fact that that was all about sailing ships as well as being Wally Wood and comics and things, and the fact that I was about 9 when I saw it, it really was a profound influence on my life, and I always wished that I'd drawn that comic. So when the Ancient Mariner came up, that was kind of my opportunity to do what Wally Wood had done.
Wow. Wow. I think, yeah, a lot of people were influenced by Wally Wood, definitely. Myself included, to be honest.
But I'd like to think a lot of people will now be influenced by you, Hunt, because, in every library I go to, in schools I travel to, there's always a copy of Rime of the Ancient Mariner, or there's always a copy of Dante's Inferno, because of these days, with a new generation, all the teachers these days are people who grew up with comics, whether it was adult comics, DC Comics, or Mad Magazine. I mean, they were prolific throughout the 70s, 80s, and some of the 90s. And with these people now working in school libraries, they have graphic novel sections, but teachers of my generation, much younger, realize the power of comics. So you're more likely to see Hunt Emerson's version of Coleridge's sort of Rime of the Ancient Mariner. You are going to see Gustave Duras. So yeah. I think it's I think it's very fascinating that in both your works, they're in libraries, and although people don't necessarily know your names, they're growing up with your comics and could very easily be influenced by that art style, the anarchic art style that we see less and less of these days.
Yeah, it's the Ancient Mariner up on the screen.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful, creepy poem, and you capture it so well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I think one of the ideas we had when we were talking about the viability or otherwise of doing a version of Inferno is that it might be used as an educational tool. Now, it's not been taken up, alas, in this country, but I know from an Italian pal of mine who lives quite near Venice, that his local secondary school has been using our Inferno as a set text because the kids have already studied Dante in their Italian classics class, so they know the story and the characters. So it's a very good way for them to learn English, perhaps not the best English, but certainly English. And it would be fantastic if that were taken on generally in Italy. But so far, that's just the one school so far that I know of.
It's one of the puzzles of my life is why we weren't able to find an Italian translation and publishing. But there you go. There you go.
Because a lot of your work has been translated, hasn't it?
It has in the past, yes. I've been translated into about 10 languages, but mostly back in the 90s when I had some books. Lady Chatterley was the one that kind of set that going because it's dirty literature.
There's a big splash, wasn't there, in the mid-90s about it? Oh, he's got it by his bedside.
Yeah, Andy's got his copy, yeah. That's in pristine condition, Andy, actually. I'm surprised it's not been more abused.
Yes.
There's Firkin.
Yes.
Firkin, yes. Been selling more Firkin recently than ever before.
Well, yes, well, that's what I was going to ask you about, but I didn't think it was appropriate earlier on whilst we were still talking about your new thing. But obviously, it's just shy of its 40th birthday. I'm surprised it was COVID that took out the magazine it appeared in.
No, it wasn't.
Oh, wasn't it?
COVID. No, it closed just before the lockdown thing happened, just before COVID. It was just, a business decision in the end.
And how, I mean, was it very quick bit of news? How does it make you feel after nearly 40 years of working with a particular character?
It's a shame they didn't take it up to 40 years. It was 39 years. So it's a shame I didn't make the 40. But, to be honest, I've been waiting for it to happen for a while now. I mean, I couldn't understand who bought the bloody magazine these days. But, it's been a great run. I missed 3 issues. There was 2 issues of Fiesta when they oversold their advertising and they had to drop it. And there's only 1 issue in the whole run that I missed my deadline.
And did you finish the strip anyway, even though you missed the deadline?
Oh, well, they just put it in the next time.
Oh, okay. So waste not, want not. Excellent.
No.
But how do you get a gig like that in the first place? Is it because where you were?
Yeah, I was illustrating for all sorts of people. I did some illustrations on Fiesta, and then they asked me if I wanted to do a comic, and because I'd been publishing a lot of comics, and I don't know, people knew who I was, and so they asked me if I wanted to do a comic, and I said yes, but I don't want it to just be an extension of the magazine, like Wicked Wonder, for example, in Mayfair, was that? Yeah. Or Penthouse. And they said, no, we want what you do. We want an underground comic. So that's what we did. And they have never once asked me to make it more raunchy or, anything like that. They've left us a completely free hand on it, which was great. The only thing was I said, I can't write this. So they gave me Tim Manley to write it. Tim had at one time been an editor of Fiesta, and he was a journalist, but he'd never written comics before, and he's done it for 40 years as well now.
Right.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm here, listening with great interest.
Let's. What was the first thing that you and I worked on together?
I'm almost certain it was Ruskin, wasn't it?
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
I mean, what happened there, I don't know if you know about, we wrote initially one comic with the very misleading title How to Be Rich, and it became a trilogy. Yeah, that's not it. And over the years it became a trilogy. Is there any smut in there's a little bit of smut in that. Essentially what happened is must be knocking on for not far off 20 years ago now. Wow. The Ruskin Foundation, based largely in Coniston Walton, Lake District, approached me because they've been trying for several years to make a comic based on one of Ruskin's texts, his economic text called Unto This Last. And the problem was that, number one, they didn't have a very talented cartoonist, and number two, essentially they weren't thinking in comic terms. They wrote a text, and then there was a sort of illustration to go with it. The story wasn't told in pictures, and they approached me because they knew of I'd done things about Ruskin in other media. I'd done a Radio 3 documentary about it, for example, and they said, will you have a crack at it? And I said, well, I'll have a crack at it, but only if I can use. Here's where we can set ourselves up for a straight line. I said, only if we can use the finest comic artist in Great Britain, possibly the world.
Couldn't get him, so
we couldn't get him. So we got some hands with it.
So I got the gig.
And I remember to this day, Hunt came down to London. And we met, I think it was outside the Wallace Collection in Manchester Square. It was a very windy day, and I remember seeing windstorms whizzing around, these little sort of dust devils. And we had a bit of a talk, and Hunt confessed that he found Unto This Last pretty boring. And eventually he sort of said, oh, all right, let's give it a go. And, for us at least, the rest is history. The comic, it wasn't for sale at the time. I think it is for sale now, but it was to be given away. I suppose 12,000 copies was it to be given away, and it went to schools, and it went to places for refugees. It went to prisons, and it had a very interesting kind of afterlife, which included, I think this is right, isn't it, Hunt, that some prisoners set up their own newspaper.
Oh yes,
in response to it.
Yeah,
it had quite a lot of effect.
Wow.
And then finally, we rounded the whole thing up a couple of years ago, and the thing had become less of a kind of illustrated lecture than a kind of story in its own right. In fact, a love story. And we called it Bloke's Progress. And it's very interesting looking back at it, that it goes from being essentially a kind of transcription of a lot of Ruskin's ideals into basically modern and humorous terms. There we go. And it turned into the lead character, Darren Bloke, and his loyal dog, Skittle, became characters in their own right. And they became almost a kind of imaginary presence in my brain for about 15 years. I still think of them very fondly.
Wow, that's cool.
So that's how we started working together.
So this was through working on the ideas of John Ruskin, who was the Victorian artist and critic and writer and polymath, I suppose. And who
where
had
did
very
you
advanced.
Sorry,
Go on,
carry
Shane.
on. No, sorry, I
Yeah,
was
go on.
just going to say, where did you go from there? How did it develop, the working relationship? Was it? I mean, when you finished, obviously you decided that you wanted to carry on working together. What sparked the next project?
Well, let's see, because the first comic, the first Ruskin comic, How to Be Rich, was 2005, and in 2009 the Ruskin people did a second one, which was called How to See. But between 2005 and 2009, we must have done something together, Kevin, and I can't remember what it was. What else we did?
I think we've done. There was a famous D.H. Lawrence Fearless Zombie Hunter, wasn't there?
Oh, yes,
We did that for Nottingham.
Yeah.
And it's really. I mean, I remember from that Lady Chatterley's Liver, and it was Nottingham wanted to do something about their literary heritage, and probably their most famous writer, 20th century writer anyway, was D.H. Lawrence, and. D.H. Lawrence talks a lot about being for life and against all the forces that oppose life, which actually is quite Ruskinian. And so I think it was came up with the idea that the opposing forces should be zombies. So he became a zombie hunter. And again, there was a fabulous, another image of Hunt's invention is that in the brief period that D.H. Lawrence was in Australia, he wrote a novel called, with the unimaginative title, Kangaroo, which a lot of people felt had fascist tendencies. And I just handed this as an idea over to Hunt, and Hunt turned it into a kangaroo bouncing around doing a Nazi salute with a swastika. Brilliant image. And again, only Hunt.
Only Hunt could get away with that one, I think. Well, when you did that, Hunt, could I just ask what was going through your mind?
You can't ask that. That's not the way it works. That's not the way it works.
Oh, there we've got an image there. Lady Chatterley's Liver on the screen as well.
No, okay. It's a case of finding gags any way you can. And there's the editorial process on finding humor is very wide, because we need jokes, and anything if it's a joke, it'll go in.
I mean, when you're writing longer form strips, Hunt, how do you insert your gags? How do you sort of pace the strips? Because obviously I've noticed like a lot of there is like this sort of regular sort of, there seems to be a rhythm of humor in there, when you're writing a longer story. How do you go about constructing that? Or is it just something you feel, you just go with it?
I don't know. I think it's a long time since I wrote a longer story, to be honest.
Yeah.
But as I said earlier, the fun part is writing it and getting the ideas down. Writing it has to be done in silence. It's very late at night usually, and just staring at a piece of paper and letting the ideas work themselves out. And I can't pin down a process to it, apart from the fact that, as I say, I'm tuned to look for visual puns in things now. Anything that can be a gag will be a gag.
I'm reasonably sure that the Lives of the Great Occultists is about 112 pages long. I'm pretty sure that every panel has at least one small joke, and sometimes has more than one, because one of the things that Hunt has learned, I think, from artists like Will Elder is that occasionally, sometimes a joke works best if it's very, very simple, but sometimes it works very well if the image is absolutely crammed. I think that's right, isn't it, Hunt? Quite often you load the ore quite strongly. One of the other great influences on Hunt, of course, is possibly the greatest comic artist of the 20th century, Herriman, Crazy Cat. And Hunt has carried over, particularly I think in the Ruskin cartoons, this idea that you have an action going on continuously in the foreground, but the background changes with every panel. It's a beautiful effect. I mean, one of the things that I talked about, overloading the image. I remember I'd read through How to Be Rich about a dozen times and thought, enjoyed all the jokes, and then started to find, if you look closely, there are even more jokes than I knew. It took me ages, for example, to discover one page where there are a whole bunch of ants swarming down from one panel to the next, because your eye kind of skips over it if you're following the story. But if you go back and look carefully, there's vastly more jokes there than hit you at first.
Yeah, I think that's a really good skill to have, I think, because obviously you need to keep the story going, don't you? The storytelling is really important, even on short strips. You don't want to lose the beat to the story, but then if you can insert all that humor, that visual humor, into the panels, it just gives it's a lot more sort of bang for your buck, if you like, for the reader, because you don't have to just read it once. You can go back and you can enjoy it, over and over. I think that's a really good way of doing things, especially for humor stories. Because I think it's a very different discipline to writing humor comics, isn't it? To writing other genres. Would you say that, Hunt?
I can't take comics seriously. I don't. I mean, there's great comics and there's rubbish comics. But I can't look at, say, superhero comics or adventure comics or anything that takes itself as being a depiction of reality or a super reality of some sort. I can't take them seriously. It's always, this is a comic, And so when I'm doing my own stuff, it's always funny. And so if there's a panel that that's just kind of taking you from one frame to the next and doesn't have a joke in it, I have to make it funny in some way, because I get the idea that people are going to look at this and say, why is he trying to be serious? What's he trying to fool us with? So everything has to have humor in it somehow. And I don't know. It's very odd talking about this stuff like this, because I do it.
Well, let's broaden the conversation. Now we're talking. I mean, I think we're very lucky in Britain, because all of us, regardless of age, grew up with a much healthier comic diet, with the European comics, the British comics, going back to Victorian times with the humour of Ali Sloper. And I think, from the 1920s onwards to 1930s, with the superhero domination, and I know it was like disappeared in the 50s, but I think we grew up in much healthier times. And I think our comics today, particularly comics like 2000 AD, as well as the Beano on the other spectrum, we've still got that sense of humour that maybe America never had.
Interesting.
Well, I find myself in everyone to stand up for America. I mean, there are a number.
I'm not standing up for.
We mentioned Man.
Yes, yeah. But I think we were soaked in it, weren't we? I mean, I remember an era where you would go into a British news agent, and although you get American comics, you could get Whizzer and Chips, you could get Beezer in the fold out. As a little kid, I remember being more drawn to British comics than I was to American, whereas in America, although you had Mad Magazine and other derivatives of that, I think we grew up in a healthier diet of comics. And I think that's reflected not only in the artists we've produced, but also the writers that now go over to an America and maybe infuse a bit more humour into their super real superheroes.
I think another point as well, Ollie, from going on from that, is that, the American humour, because you got amazing stuff. You got Hate, Crumb, all those guys, but a lot of it was underground, maybe.
And a lot of it came later. I mean, our comics because of our weekly pattern, it always had to be quick fire. And it's those sort of classics like Leo Baxendale and all people who sort of was all part of our childhoods, where we grew up, whether we grew up at the beginning of the century, whether we grew up in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, we always had those British comics. And I'm wondering whether that's that's why we've created people like yourself, Hunt, and other such creators in this country more so than others. What I'm saying is, we're the best.
We're the best at British comics, for sure.
Yeah.
I grew
there
up,
we go.
When I was a kid, there was all those children's comics, but we never saw American comics. They were very, very early days for those coming over, and I certainly never saw them until quite a long time later. So it was British kids comics that were the big influence on me, and then Mad, because for some reason, Mad magazine originally, when it was a comic, they started reprinting them as black and white paperback books. Ballantine published them, and you had to turn them on the side to read them. And one of those turned up at our school when I was at junior school, and I must have been about 8 or 9, and I remember a kid had this thing, and there was a great crowd of kids all gathered around looking at it, and I kind of, from the back, I kind of got a glimpse of what this was, and I just knew I had to get close to this. And I remember fighting my way through these kids to get to this book.
Wow.
And I was sold. And then I picked up a few more of those and started looking for them. So they were a really big influence. But it was those, and it was British kids comics. And the fact that they were both funny. I mean, I was never interested in Victor and Hotspur and things, to be honest. But the funny comics and the American funny comics, that's what kind of got me going on it.
I think the other thing about Mad magazine was because quite a lot of the strips were parodies of other comic strips that I'd never actually seen. So, for example, Pogo the Possum, I first learned about from a parody in Mad magazine. And I thought, well, actually, I'd quite like to check out the original. I checked out the original. I loved it. To this day, I still think Pogo is one of the great American comic strips.
Yes,
largely forgotten by, I'm afraid to say.
What was he called in Mad? What was Pogo called?
I can't remember.
It was Gopo Gossam.
Something like that. But they also spoofed things I've really to this day never seen, like Terry and the Pirates. So I've got a vague idea of what they must have been like from the parodies, but I've never seen the originals. I loved Pogo was tremendous. It had a kind of a bit like Herriman. It was very funny, but there was an element in it which, the Ponzi word poetic kind of applies to it. It was really kind of in a weird way beautiful.
Yeah.
The great George Kelly.
Drawn by an artist who was trained with Disney, so it had that beautiful quality to it. That the Disney.
That was a very low-pitched noise you made then, Ollie.
Well, no, because I remember seeing the old Pogo strips, and you can see that there was a certain Disney-esque bit to it. But although I hadn't seen many of them, it's my generation. It was Bone by Jeff Smith who captured that same sort of Pogo-esqueness for a new generation. But I read about it, loved the stuff I've seen. But again, like you mentioned, Mad and all of these were so well produced. The artwork, the writing was so high quality month by month that you couldn't help but be drawn in. And I think I had that same moment, Hunt, like you, where you just voraciously look for Mad magazines wherever you can get them.
Yeah. Well, my first introduction, like Kevin, to American culture was through Mad. And so I knew about Frank N. Stein in Mad before I knew anything about Frankenstein.
The sequence where he bangs on the radiator. No, sorry, you think that he's doing some complex experiment. In fact, he's banging on the radiator to get the superintendent to send up more heat. It might be 50 years since I've read that, but I remember laughing at it.
Wonderful.
It's incredible how you remember
horror films and things like that. I knew about them first through Mad. Superheroes as well. I didn't know about Batman. I knew about Batboy and Ruben, and Super Duper Man before I heard of Superman. Plastic Sam before Plastic Man. So consequently, when I did get to see the originals, I couldn't take them seriously because what I loved was the parodies in the first place. That was the real thing for me.
Yeah. Hello to Chica Whitehead out there on the comments.
Hi, Chica.
Loves the Beano and rats.
A good friend of mine is Chica. She's a lovely woman.
Right. Excellent.
Going back, was saying, is the amount of newsstand titles now, comic newsstands, is what, 5?
Maybe
5 or 6,
something like that.
When we were kids, there was shelves of actual comics. Now you've got Viz, 2000 AD, Commando, Phoenix.
Oh, you're talking to the wrong person. I don't read comics.
No, not I. I read Viz occasionally.
Now, from the newsstand stuff, things like Dogman.
Yeah,
kids are reading.
It's incredible what that book has done, isn't it? The numbers that book has done. It's outsold. I was listening to someone else talk about it the other day, and it's outsold the entire publication catalog that has gone out for the whole of the American mainstream. Everything in diamond, basically. Right. It's outsold the lot.
Heard of it?
Sorry?
Has anyone else heard of it?
What's that?
Well, I couldn't hear it. What is it?
Dogman. It's
Dogman.
To Captain Underpants.
Right.
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, I know. I'm aware of the author.
Paperback comic for kids.
Yes.
And it flies off the shelves.
Yeah. My first comic book was called Dogman.
Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, we've got a lawsuit coming in.
The lawyers.
1975 or something like that.
Right.
When I was working at the Arts Lab, the first comic, sustained comic that I did was a thing called Dogman, which was originally sort of doggerel poetry, performance poetry, but written by a guy called Paul Fisher, who used to perform it. And we made it into a comic book and published it. And when it was published, we did it as a theatre show. I was in it, and Paul was in it. I'll tell you who was in it. Janice Connolly, who is now Mrs. Barbara Nice. No recognition. There will be. You will hear of Barbara Nice. And we toured it around. It was a stage thing. We made huge canvas flats that I painted with cartoons, and we had a furniture removal van, and we toured it around in a furniture removal van. Yeah.
All right.
And then after that, there was a comedian and writer called John Dowie. He did.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he did a stage show called Dogman, which is an entirely different thing altogether. And now we have the current Dogman. So there is no copyright on titles.
No,
there isn't.
I mean, it's so incredibly generic. I guess it's very difficult to copyright
the
actual.
Another Batman, you get into trouble.
Yeah. It's biased against certain animals, isn't there? It's
Kevin.
It's very,
Didn't we do something about vampires? About
There he is.
We did. I think it didn't end up in the book, but we did Bram Stoker.
Yes.
It was that must have been 2012 because that was the 100th anniversary of his death. News of his death arrived the same day they announced the sinking of the Titanic. So talking about being upstaged. And also, as I think we pointed out in the comic, the Dracula was not actually all that well known in his lifetime. It wasn't until about the early 1920s when it was made into an enormously popular stage show. That's when Dracula started to become well known, and that's when Stoker became famous. And then, of course, went to Hollywood, and with the Bela Lugosi movie, and from that point on, Dracula's part of, it's one of the most great staples of contemporary culture. But yeah, we did a few vampire things, didn't we? Because I'd written a vampire book at that time.
Yeah. He's done a vampire stage musical as well, by the way.
Oh yes,
I was reading about that. I wanted to ask you about that, Kevin, actually, because
gosh, well, it was. I mean, there is a CD which I could probably dig out for you. It was. It began. How did it begin? I don't know. It was. I think it was by way of publicity for a book I wrote called Bite, a vampire handbook, which sold. In the hardback version sold fantastically well. The paperback sold virtually nothing, which means it must have exhausted the target audience.
All right.
But I collaborated with a pal of mine called Colin Minchin. I wrote just for fun. I wrote a Vampire Blues, which would obviously begin "Woke up this evening," and we wrote that, and I thought, actually, this is kind of cool. So we put together, I suppose, 13, 14 songs, something like that, and then with a narrative, and we turned it into an album, and then we actually staged it as part of the Ealing Festival.
Right.
And we had a 19-piece band called the Electric Dark Orchestra, and there are videos of it. And to be frank, because we only had a limited number of times to rehearse it, because with a big band like that, we broke the rehearsals down into 3 or 4 musicians at a time. So we'd only had one complete run through. So it's kind of a miracle that we got through the entire, and so far only, performance without having too many train wrecks. And it went down pretty well, but for some reason, Cameron McIntosh just hasn't approached me. I'm sitting on my phone most days.
It's because all the theatres are shut at the moment. That's why.
Yeah,
that's the only reason.
Colin and I do talk about reviving it sometime, but God knows when that's going to happen.
I mean, because the other thing, because you have a fascination, don't you, with vampires? That's fair to say, isn't it, Kevin?
Yeah.
And you did Nosferatu 1922, didn't you?
I wrote there's the British Film Institute has a series called Modern Classics, and Classics, and I'd done a couple of them already. I did the one on Withnail and I did the one on Lawrence of Arabia, and then they came to me saying that they wanted to do a classic horror film, and I couldn't think of anything I'd seen to write about than Nosferatu, so I did. Again, it sold about 2.5 copies, both to me. But I'm actually quite pleased with the little book, because I found out a lot of things that I think people just didn't know about it.
I mean, there's all sorts of strange stories around the creation of that film, aren't there? I mean, a lot of them have become sort of modern myth almost.
Well, Albin Grau, who was the producer and sort of what can I put it, the kind of guiding spirit of it, though Murnau directed it, he was a practicing occultist. And if you look at the scene where the Count Orlok, the Dracula figure, looks at some magical inscriptions on a piece of paper, those are for real. That's a real magical formula as drawn up by Albin Grau. And there are rumors to the effect that when Crowley, a few years later, came to Germany to try and expand his occult empire, that he fell in with Albin Grau, and Grau took some documentary footage of Crowley doing this. And if that ever showed up, it would be fascinating, but thus far it hasn't, and probably never will.
One of those modern myths.
Albin Grau, of course, made it into Lives of the Great Occultists.
He did.
Yes,
he did.
I was just going to ask that, actually.
Going full circle.
Yes, go full circle. Yeah. He certainly deserves a place
in hand.
I mean, he was, insofar as you can be a big shot in occult circles, he was a big shot in German occult circles just after the First World War. And he claimed that one of the germs of Nosferatu, although, basically they nicked it from the Bram Stoker novel, was that when he'd been on active service during the First World War in Serbia, he met an old scrote who said that his village had been attacked by a vampire, and he'd actually met vampires. So there was a kind of folklore background to the whole thing as well.
I mean, I'm always fascinated when I hear these stories of real vampires, and there are so many of them about, and so many, and the fact that they're so consistent only, I suppose, just says that the myth is so, well populated amongst the, all over the world, all the various versions of it. And I suppose
that lovely myth that Max Schreck himself was a vampire.
Yeah, so taken up in quite a good film with John Malkovich as Murnau and Willem Dafoe as Shrek. I recommend it highly. It's called Shadow of the Vampire.
Yeah,
Shadow of the Vampire. Yeah, I love that movie.
Very good film.
Yeah, it is. It's genuinely spooky and creepy. They really did. It really works.
But made by somebody who obviously loves silent film as well.
Yeah.
At the time they made the James Whale movie as well, didn't they?
Gods and Monsters.
Yeah.
That was made, and again, it wasn't a bad film, but it was mostly it's about the very end of James Whale's life, when he was sort of, he was quite a closeted gay guy. And it's about, I think it's an imaginary affair that he has with a handsome young guy, who he reminds him of the Frankenstein monster. It's a good film in its own right.
And you've made a few little.
It was the guy from the Mummy.
Sorry, Andy.
No, just saying that it was a guy from the Mummy, whatever his name was.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The guy from the Mummy, the action.
Yes, I know who you mean.
Boris Karloff?
No, Brandon someone.
Brendan Fraser. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
He was.
Who's not? That's not him.
No.
Yeah.
That's the Mummy.
That's a random picture from Sam. Thank you, Sam.
It's Harry Hill's dad.
One of my female friends confessed the other day she finds she's has a massive crush on Harry Hill. Which is the first time I ever heard that one.
Oh my gosh.
And the last time as well, I imagine. He looks more like Hollywood's answer of Harry Hill.
That's brilliant.
Do you not remember that? That's James Whale.
Oh gosh!
Oh, the other
yeah.
Right.
Late night TV in the 90s.
Yeah, that's him.
Yorkshire TV.
That's him.
Yes, of course.
Regular student fodder when you got in from the pubs.
He had Wayne Hussey from The Mission on, and Wayne Hussey stand up. He was that drunk.
He was trying to be a shock jock, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was him.
Yeah, not that James Whale.
James Whale.
No, the one Magneto James Whale we're talking about.
Gandalf James Whale.
And to go back to the film subject, Kevin, you've made a few short films yourself, haven't you?
Yes, I mean that kicked off because the first one was quite literally a promo for my vampire book Bite, and they, the publisher gave me a few £100 to do it, and I did it, and then I kind of got the bug. So I don't know. I guess I made about 10 short films now, and some of them have been funded by publishers because they are based on novels. I think probably, by my own judgment, the most competent film I ever made was called The Lives of the Vostiaks. Sorry, The Last of the Vostiaks, based on a novel by an Italian novelist, very nice guy, called Diego. God, I've forgotten his name.
Marani?
But it's
Diego Marani? Sorry? Diego Marani.
It. Yeah. And that was great. We went to the woods outside Oslo to film most of it, and just had a wonderful adventure. I think it's quite a good film as well, though I didn't say it myself. And as I say, the most recent film I made is now 3 years ago, but it was called A Mask for Dr. D. And the guy I got to, because I can't afford professional actors, the guy I got to play it is an extremely distinguished art historian who just curated the Aubrey Beardsley exhibition at the Tate. It was the first Tate exhibition to be the victim of the virus.
Oh dear.
Yeah. But again, if you want to look at it, it's called A Mask, MASQUE, A Mask for Dr. D. It's on YouTube. And all good providers.
We'll try and get all these links onto the Facebook page so people can check them out.
That'll be great.
Yeah. There's lots.
Can I just ask as well, going back to the original subject, can you just give it one last plug so people have maybe just tuned in, the publisher, when it's out, how much?
Okay. Well, the book is published by Knockabout. It is out now, and you can buy it. The best place to buy it is from me at my website, largecow.com. But other than that, it's being distributed through the normal channels, the comic book trade channels, and also regular bookshops. And it's $13.99, $12.99. $12.99. Yeah,
more of a bargain.
112 pages of full colour. It's got
12 years of work.
It's got an absolutely excellent introduction written by Kevin. I mean that. It's a really great piece of writing. There's a forward.
A forward by Gary Lackman, who used to be the bass player for Blondie.
Wow, really?
Wow.
If you've got the contacts, you use them.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Tell me again, Kevin, why is Gary in it? Oh, there we go.
Gary has, after being a pop star for about 15 minutes, he wrote one of Blondie's most famous hits, "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," and a royalty check drops through his letterbox twice a year, I think, and keeps him fluent, keeps him solvent. After that, he moved away from New York and he did a degree in esoteric stuff, and he's for the last 25 years or so, he's lived in London, and has done the remarkable thing of supporting himself almost entirely by writing books about the occult. And he's a very nice guy. And he once kindly said to me that he was going to let his subscription to Fortean Times lapse, except that he loved Lives of the Great Occultists so much, and so he kept up his subscription. So, and I said, well, could you possibly, as hunters use every contact you got, would you possibly write a little forward? And he wrote a lovely little forward saying how brilliant we are.
Oh, that's really nice.
Well, he's a man of great astuteness, obviously.
Exactly.
That's fantastic, though, isn't it?
I wanted to ask as well is, so do you own the copyright? So this Fortean Times book?
No, I own the copy, or we own the copyright to it. That's not a problem with Fortean Times. No.
That's always good. I assume it is also available from the evil Amazon as well.
It is, yeah. And so far it's had all 5-star reviews.
40 times, yeah.
Wow, that's really good. That's really good. So we'll put a link to that as well on the Facebook. Okay. So that people
that Large Cow is better.
Yeah,
yes, of course. We always encourage people to buy direct from the creators.
Yeah,
and you get it signed. You'll get your copy signed and scribbled in, and I also have some little free gifts that go with it as well.
Wow!
Right.
Old issues of Fiesta.
yeah, old issues of Fiesta. Yeah.
Slightly foxed.
Hello, Sam.
Hello.
Hello.
I do exist.
Who is that man?
I just want to say I'm a really big fan of you, Hunt. I have
thank you.
I've got Lady Chatley's Leather and Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. It's lovely.
Thank you. It's very nice of you.
Now get back in your cupboard.
Come on, fanboy.
Oh, dear me. So, we've gone over our hour now, so we're not going to keep you any longer than we promised that we would. But we would like to say, all of us, thank you so much, guys, for coming on.
Thank you. It's been good fun.
Pleasure.
Been good fun. Thank you.
We all popped our cherry together, so thank you.
This was the first episode of the Icecast Live, so there were a few sort of technical hitches, but I think we got through them all right. And
Sam's wife.
You guys were really gracious and very patient with us. But yeah, it's been really good to catch up with you. I've not seen you guys for a while, so it's lovely just to see you and to catch up and chat. And hopefully we'll see
next
each other
year in the lakes with any luck.
Yes, hopefully it'll be in person. Yeah. Let's hope so.
God only knows when it's going to happen again.
So thanks again, guys.
Thanks very much, Shane.
Yeah,
thanks, Andy.
Cheers.
Thanks, Ollie. Nice to see you.
Everyone.
Kevin,
Nice
lovely to see you.
See you soon. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.
Bye.